Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is Robotaxis, microplastics, and regulatory pressure. So the emphasis today is to talk about how companies and organizations can really think about regulatory pitfalls as they go to develop new products, as well as think about managing their existing products. So the agenda today essentially is as follows. We're super lucky to have a world-class expert on this topic join us, Norbert Teston. He has 25 years of experience dealing with these kinds of issues and topics at Adidas, and will be sharing his wisdom with us. So we're super excited to have him here. And one of the things we like to do in these webinar series is to really use this as a way to kind of give people a sense of how actually Prescouter tackles questions and tackles challenges and kind of applies them to specific situations. And so this is kind of almost like a lightweight version of that. And we're going to do that twofold. So first, we're going to look at, how do I successfully transition my company into a new service with unfamiliar regulatory requirements? So we're covering, that kind of question. And, if you think about that question and how much you know now, the idea is by the end of today's session, you'll know a lot more. And perhaps over the coming days, you can kind of check in with yourself around that. And then the second topic as well we'll be covering is around existing products that companies have and how to manage those. But before we get into all that, I want to quickly introduce Corey. So Corey's been with Prescouter for probably over a decade now. He's a commercial director at Prescouter, working particularly with our clients in food and beverage and CPG. He's brought on hundreds and hundreds of clients over the years. So Corey, thanks for joining us. I mean, I'm curious to get your perspective on why you think clients work with Prescouter.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dino. Yep, if you can go to the next page. Perfect. So for those who are less familiar with Prescouter, very simply, we're a research consulting firm helping clients with a variety of different business and technical challenges. That could really be anything from technology landscapes to finding new partners, market sizing, understanding regulatory risk, or even implementation of digital or AI applications. So it really does depend on your goals. We're going to customize the experience for you. And really what it comes down to is we know you don't typically have the time or perhaps internal expertise to curate and make sense of all the information out there.
And what do you think makes Prescouter special compared to other options that folks might consider?
Yeah, I think one of our clients was kind enough to provide a quote that I think summarizes it perfectly. To have Prescouter on our team is like having an infinite number of experts in every imaginable area of research. So we've spent over a decade building our own global network of subject matter experts and advanced degree analysts, really from every background you can think of. So it allows us to staff a team on demand that's really fully customized around the particular challenge. And our methodology, which is quite unique, is kind of assembling these diverse teams of analysts and experts with cross-disciplinary backgrounds. So we can explore adjacent industries, we can have an unbiased perspective when we're working with our clients.
Great. Well, thanks, Corey, for joining us. So I'm going to bring in Daniel, who's going to be joined by Garrett. And both of these folks actually are kind of some of our top people at Prescouter. They both have PhDs in chemical engineering. Daniel is a technical director who's passionate about responsive materials, polymer engineering, nanoscale engineering. So I'm going to bring in first, and he's going to kind of kick off the discussion, and then he'll hand it over to Garrett for the second part.
Great, thank you, Dino, and hello, everyone. I will be one of the moderators for today, along with Garrett, as Dino mentioned. So our goal for today is to dive into some of the nuances of navigating regulatory compliance as a function of two themes that we've noted across projects we've completed lately. The first topic we'll tackle is how do we navigate the regulatory and product compliance issues of entering a new market or a new space that traditionally we don't sell to. I'll provide an example based on the autonomous vehicle space, and Norbert also has some stories to share with us. Afterward, we'll move into the nuances of a product category where you're already selling, but there is legislative and regulatory compliance issues that could be coming your way. So how do you best prepare to ensure that you're successfully navigating and maintaining market share in your product development portfolios? So I'd like to start off with a poll just to gauge where folks are regarding their product innovation goals and if they're navigating issues outside of their current space. If we could share the poll, I'm not sure if folks can see it, and feel free to simply reply. It's great to get a gauge of who's already engaged in these exercises, or maybe folks who are not sure if regulatory compliance should be part of their innovation pipeline. I'll give a few seconds for folks to reply. All right. Well, thank you for participating. So today I'd like to use the concept of autonomous vehicles, specifically for the function of functioning as a robotaxi, as a great example of a regulation complexity as automobile manufacturers try to transition into becoming service providers. So first of all, why autonomous vehicles? Why robotaxis? There's a few arguments, and there's great potential immediate benefits as well as potential long-term benefits. In the short term, this could enable safer, lower cost transportation, as well as increase accessibility to folks to help them get to where they need to go. Also, as these are further implemented and rolled out, we could see a day where traffic congestion is minimized as routes are optimized by autonomous vehicles, and potentially a lower carbon footprint, especially if we navigate toward the use of electric vehicles in the autonomy space. Also, this could free up space at home for folks. Potentially one day we don't need to own automobiles, so we can find new functions for our garage, for example. The current space is dominated by about a dozen players. There's the traditional automobile manufacturers that have their own brands. There's also a handful of new entrants in this space that are deploying pilot projects in cities such as San Francisco, Arizona, Miami, and there's further rollouts that are planned. Also, it's a potential huge market. Taking a collective aggregate of market estimates, tens to hundreds of billions by 2030 on a global front, and also China's also experimenting through a company called Baidu on robotaxi. Unfortunately, as with novel innovations, there's not a concrete regulatory framework, and also as these experiments are being rolled out in cities, there's been some issues. Issues as benign as road closures and blockages as the robotaxis maybe malfunction or lose communication to the controlling system, damage to construction sites, for example, or issues where roads are being repaired and the robotaxi might get stuck in the concrete. There's also been issues with interrupting emergency vehicle services, and unfortunately, an egregious event where a pedestrian was hit by a robotaxi after being hit by another car. So what can we do to help innovate and get the benefits of this technology while minimizing these hazards? The flip side is there has been reports of robotaxis reporting less collisions compared to human drivers. So both of these things are happening at the same time. But how do we navigate this framework to ensure a successful transition? So what is the current framework and why should you care as a brand manager when you enter a new space? So I like this example because a robotaxi represents multiple technologies, and it's an overlap of different regulatory bodies. So on one hand, it's an autonomous vehicle. It's also a mobility on demand service. And for companies implementing electric vehicles, there's regulatory bodies managing the electric vehicle space. So there's ambiguity and complexity as to where the liability falls and how to create a standardized regulatory framework to ensure both pedestrian safety and that liability is falling on the right party. As we shift from the concept of human error as the source of liability, then we may be moving toward the manufacturers of the navigation systems, the electronics components in the vehicles, as well as the automobile parts. As we move forward and continue to roll out autonomous services, not just for robotaxis, autonomous delivery, automated trucking, liability will shift to different components of the supply chain, the car makers, the software companies, and potentially on the municipality front, who is creating the infrastructure in which these vehicles are operating. So why is it important to incorporate these considerations early on? What I'm showing here is an extreme example, but you don't want your consumer base literally destroying your product. Failure to adhere could lead to legal repercussions, damage to your brand reputation, and of course, compromise customer safety. A benefit of planning early on, especially in a rollout that's city by city or state by state, is if you're ahead of the curve, you can enter the market earlier and dominate market share. Also, you can ultimately avoid shutdowns of your pet project, whether that's internally or externally. For example, Apple has just recently announced they are shutting down their electric vehicle program after 10 years of development due to the engineering challenges and the lack of a regulatory framework or its complexity. A few strategies we recommend at Prescouter: you can champion your own framework early on and become the decision maker. Decision making under deep uncertainty is a tool used in the energy sector and water management sector that could apply to this space. Alternatively, you could identify folks that are already working in this space or developing tools to help you navigate this space. For example, there's a software company whose pure focus is regulatory compliance for autonomous vehicles, and they're using machine learning algorithms to help develop a regulatory framework based on examples from other industries. And of course, creating early partnerships with regulatory bodies, legal experts, and industry stakeholders early on to ensure you're navigating the potential pitfalls and championing your regulatory framework early on. Toward the point of legal or regulatory experts, I'd like to take this time to introduce our subject matter expert for today. I have the pleasure of introducing Norbert Teston, who both Garrett and I have had the pleasure to work with over the years. He's currently the founder and principal of NT Creative and Consulting, where he helps CEOs and companies in general navigate regulatory and product compliance issues. And he also has spent 25 years in the sportswear and footwear industry as a regulatory compliance expert. So Norbert, I'd like to pass it to you to share stories about your experience in helping navigate new product development compliance issues.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. So I don't have much experience in robotaxis, unfortunately, but if there's one lesson to remember is you do not want your consumer to burn your products in the streets. That is not a good look for the brand. So, but what I wanted to share with the group today is an example of during my 25 years where I had to face the particularly challenging time when the brand decided to go in a completely different space, and it was the electronic space. And that shoe, for those who don't know, this is actually the second or third generation of that shoe. But our innovation team decided or conceptualized and worked around the concept of creating a dynamic cushioning system, meaning there was a bunch of components that could be stiffened within the sole, and there's an entire engine and a battery system inside the product that would correct the stiffness of the heel as you were running, or according to the ground, the hardness of the ground, or according to the preference of the user. So there was an entire innovation stream that was built around that. I actually have the shoe as well with me here, and you can see the engine in the back here. So that was, I do remember at that time, and it was probably 15 years ago or so pretty advanced. But I do remember at that time kind of taking a few minutes to breathe deeply, because as much as I knew about footwear, and our organization was very, very expert at footwear, we had no idea what electronics meant. And we didn't know there were some experts in our innovation team, but the rest of the organization itself was very uneducated or unaware of what the consequences are. And so we started working on this. I remember flying to Asia a few times, working directly with our innovation teams on site, and also our factories, just to be able to build up the necessary framework around it. So it was quite an experience. And what I realized, though, and I think that goes back to what you were saying, Daniel, as well, is that this is going to be the future. Collaboration and intersecting industries is going to be the future for a lot of brands out there. And indeed, I think the benefits of what we did through that experience and through working with that first shoe, we actually established our first framework. So we built up templates. It forced us to build templates that we ended up reusing over and over again every time there was a challenging innovation where we didn't have a framework existing internally for it. And that framework is still in place and is still being used nowadays. And there's been a lot more examples of collaborations and like crossing the boundaries of a specific space that we've experienced over the years. So what I wanted also to share with you, if you can move to the next slide, is kind of what to think about when, and that's the way I tend to approach it. So I'll share that with you. But what do I think about when such a situation comes up? And there's different things. I'm not going to go through all the details, but if we look at just the blue wording in there, is think of the different pieces that you have to look at very in detail with your people internally, talk to experts externally, like try to get as broad of a network as possible, bring in pre-scouters and those types of expertise as well. But what I would recommend is look at the proof of concept first of all, and make sure that is defined really tightly. Then look at everything that it implies in terms of testing and compliance. Make sure there's a process for innovation, for introducing innovation, because there's going to be iterations most likely of that innovation. Governance and documentation, hypercritical. You want to keep everything on file because it becomes a legal matter if anything happens down the road. And so you want to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted. And then think in terms of systems as well, right? It has to be integrated in your regular systems, again, so you can report, you can track, etc. And then finally, look at your manufacturing and your scaling, just because there's a whole lot of complexity that can happen as soon as you start manufacturing something, right? It's one thing conceptualizing and make one piece of it that works. It's another to make 1,000 or 1,000,000. And then the last thing I would say, and that's been a concern, especially the past few years, is claims and copies. So everything you say about that product as well, make sure it is consistent with what your proof of concept has been looking at, right? So those are different things. And I actually, in the shower this morning, because this is where ideas come up, there was one thing that I realized is my recommendation, first of all, is you can choose, you can decide to say, I'm going to build that expertise internally, but you could also partner with very strong experts or organizations that do have that expertise already. And that's what I tend to recommend. Throughout the last years, at least in my job, anytime there was something that was brand new, I would say, just make sure you find the right partner. Find someone who's had years of experience, because that expertise is invaluable and they will help you build what you need. All right. So partnering is a lot more productive in my view as trying to rebuild that entire expertise internally.
Great. Thank you so much, Norbert. At this point, we'll transition to our next topic for today. So I will pass the mic to Garrett Wheaton to help us discuss navigating a space where you're already selling products, but legislative or regulatory compliance may become an issue in the future. Thanks,
Great.
Garrett.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. So yeah, Garrett Wheaton, Senior Project Manager at Prescouter. And yeah, I'll be walking us through this next topic area as Daniel talked about. We have an existing product line facing potential regulatory requirements. I'll be using PFAS and microplastics kind of frame the conversation here. I'd like to start off with a poll though. Maybe give everybody 30 seconds to complete it. Kind of wondering, are you considering PFAS chemistries or microplastics in relation to your products and packaging? Great. Excited to see what the results of this poll look like. And then everybody, if you have any questions for Norbert, we'll be doing a Q&A session at the as we wrap up this one. So kind of, put us in the Q&A box. Any questions you have, we'll work to address those during that upcoming QA session. So we'll be closing the poll here in 30 seconds. Great. Could we queue up the poll results? Great. Okay, well, it seems like a lot of people here on the call are considering PFAS chemistries and microplastics. So I think you'll find a lot of value in Norbert's opinions and insights here at the end of the section. Great. So can we go to the next slide? Okay, so PFAS really encompasses a large family of chemicals. There's over 5,000 compounds, and they've been really designed to make products resistant to heat, oils, stains, and water. And really, given their excellent performance characteristics and cost, they found their way into the usage of a wide range of products. We see them in photography, firefighting foams, fast food packaging, nonstick cookware, paints, really a wide range of products across the space. Their prevalence, though, is leading to daily exposure for consumers through common items such as fast food, packaging, and cosmetics. This really matters because PFAS are increasingly become connected to serious health hazards such as liver damage, testicular cancer, lower fertility. So we really need to be paying attention to them for these impending and serious health concerns. So given the increasing health risks, we're seeing a lot of regulations ramping up and litigation taking place. You'll notice that a lot of the litigation that's happened to date has actually been dismissed, but we certainly are expecting to see continued litigation alleging harm for these PFAS-containing products. One positive area that recently came to the front is there's actually been a voluntary phase out of PFAS chemicals in U.S. food contact packaging that's been fulfilled, and this is going to eliminate a significant source of dietary exposure to consumers. So next slide. So now you might be thinking to myself, I have PFAS in my products, how should I proceed? I think it's good to look at PFAS within your products and then put them into 3 buckets and determine, where your products might fall here. We have the non-essentials, so a product where, it's adding a functionality, but it might not really be required. We have the substitutable products where PFAS are playing an important role for the product, but maybe there's emerging substitutions available. Then finally, we have the essential category where it plays a critical role to health and safety. And it might be a little bit harder to remove PFAS's amazing functionalities here. So we're seeing in the can you go back to slide? So we're seeing in the non-essential and substitutable spaces, commercialized products coming online from players such as Micron Powders, OrganoClick, but definitely in the essential space, we need more R&D to really build out this category. So you need to really understand when you're looking at these spaces, solutions that are out there and which ones, apply to meet your specific needs and capabilities. The same replacements aren't going to work for every company, depending on your products. So you really need to take the time to understand what's out there and what's going to fit your needs the best. Now, compared to PFAS, the health implications of microplastics are relatively unknown at this point, but they're being increasingly found in some concerning places. We've seen studies coming out in 2022 with microplastics being found in human breast milk. So I think, this is going to be another area where, we're going to need to start thinking about upcoming regulations. Maybe we're self-regulating ourselves or governments are going to start imposing as the microplastic problem continues to pursue and continue forward. So Norbert, I'd like to, ask you, when you're thinking about in your professional experience, how would you tackle a problem where like PFAS or microplastics, where you have a current product line facing, emerging or uncertain regulations?
Yeah, so I think this is unfortunately very common. So the way I tend to explain it to my stakeholders and people who are not necessarily following regulations across the world is that think of it as being a very dynamic world, the world of regulations, and how you build your standards internally. So my team and I were responsible for managing and developing standards, and literally we had a whole team across the world that were tracking regulations, but also building the framework internally to make sure that we were constantly as close as possible to the ideal scenario, if we want, in terms of securing the business, minimizing the risk, etc. So the way I used to talk to people about this, and I still do, is that think of it as being a kind of an array of different buckets. And you have your requirements that on the left side, if you look at the left side of the slide, you have your requirements internally that comes from very strict law and regulations, right? Things that have been existing for a while that are highly regulated. There are certification, testing that needs to happen, etc., depending on your industry. Obviously, the medical world, the automotive world, like everything that has a high component of safety would fall into that, right? Or protective equipment, etc. And then you have a bucket of industry best practices and standards, right? Things that are recommended that are here because industries or corporations have been coming together, defining standards together, so that there's some alignment around how to approach a specific topic. And then you've got your internal brand values, right, that are not necessarily related to what your competitors are doing, but those are things that make you who you are, and those are commitments that you've made to yourself. And then there's a space, so then let's move to the right side of the slide. Then there's a space where there's no requirement really needed. There's no testing, no compliance that's needed necessarily. But then you've got that space in between, that no man's land, where as a company, as an organization, you really have to exercise due diligence and really try to anticipate on how things are moving forward, right? And unfortunately, this is a very gray area, but that's also what's going to differentiate you from your competitors and give you competitive advantage. And so how do you navigate that space is basically, first of all, leverage your brand experience, your employees' experience, your supply chain. Look at what consumers are saying, where their standings are, find partners and research groups. On the microplastics, there's a lot of research that's happening. There's a lot of study sales as well that are looking at it, trying to define standards, etc. Study the existing landscape of upcoming regulations and stuff, so trying to track what's happening. Conduct thorough testing, so test and test again. Like, you cannot over test stuff to make sure that you're really doing as much as you can to understand what you're facing here. And then practice due diligence. So one example and one story that I like to tell people as well is, imagine if you don't know what decision to take. Imagine that you're going to be at court defending your case here. What are you going to tell the jury? That you felt comfortable with the decision you made because you've done enough testing, you've tried to check as many boxes that you can. And I can tell you, for having done it myself, for having been to court and faced the judge and the jury to defend the case, it's so much better if you have done everything you could and you can be confident to say, there was a component that I didn't know, or there was something I didn't know, but I've done as much as I could at that point. We've really put all the efforts we could, right? So there's a bit of a component. And then the other thing I would say in terms of the research, Pre-Scouters and is extremely well positioned for this. We've worked with them, and that's how we actually got to work together a lot. For example, in the space of compression, because we had no idea. My team and I didn't have the expertise internally. We didn't know what we had to face. The regulatory landscape was very broken. There was a lot of different regulations across the markets. And Adidas as a brand is a global brand. And so we needed to anticipate all the different types of regulations that we could be facing. Plus, we had a foot into potentially the medical world, which is highly, highly regulated too. So understanding that gray area helped us build a direction and a strategy internally that would prepare us for the future as well. Because everything that's in that no man's land area is going to start moving into a regulatory world. Things are constantly evolving. So I wanted to share that with you, and hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Norbert. At this point, I'd like to move us into the QA session. As a reminder, you're welcome to add questions to the queue. And selfishly, I'd like to start us off because I have a question for you, Norbert. Mm-hmm. Regarding the no man's land component, and let's take microplastics as an example. What strategies can you use? Let's say you want to justify self-regulation of I don't know, I'm a toy manufacturer. We want to ensure there's no microplastics, but even though no one's telling us to do so. How do you quantify the ROI or the benefit to the business of self-regulating when you're not being told to?
Well, so one way to quantify your investment in compliance and quality is to look at the cost of a return, so the cost of non-quality itself. So look at your worst case scenario. Let's say you go into a new market, you produce 100,000 products, and you're facing a recall. because there was a couple of injuries or things have happened and a judge orders you to recall the product, or the CPSC or whoever is a figure of authority, right? The problem is you're going to have not only the cost of the product, the cost of the destruction of the product, the cost of shipping the product back to its facilities, the loss of sales as well. And that goes high really, really quickly, right? You're talking millions of dollars really fast. Compare that with the investment that you can make upfront, right? And if you say, okay, let's say the risk is to $20 million, right, of a full recall. If I invest, let's say 2 or 3 or 5% of this upfront to really try to cross all my T's and dot all my I's and make sure that I do everything I can in advance and invest in the teams, invest in the time for people to really do that, find the resources externally or internally, and then really build up something for the company that makes sense and that addresses the risk. Because the idea is really to go into how much risk are you running as an organization and then elevating that as much as possible. So you can also think in terms of stages, right? You could say, okay, well, let's invest $50,000. We'll do a research, try to figure out what the impact could be. How could we measure that? Bring that to your board. The board can discuss and say, is this something we want to invest further or not? That becomes a business decision where the liability of the board is really involved, and they have to sign off on it, right? And then you can move into phases that are a little more in depth if you realize that, yeah, we need to put more work into it. So that's really how I would approach it. And it's really all about risk assessment.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we have a couple questions from the audience. Garrett, if you want to front a few of those.
And yeah, great answer to that, Daniel's initial question. Learned a lot there. So a question coming in from the audience. I know we were talking about this earlier too in the conversation. When do you start conducting testing to meet the specific marketing claims? You kind of mentioned that you have the concept, you're testing things out, but then you got to make sure those keep aligning with your marketing. But yeah, when do you kind of start that testing for marketing claims?
As early as you can.
Okay.
So the idea is really, don't think of testing as a separate thing. Think of it as being some sort of validation of your innovation as you go through cycles of sampling as well, right? What I'd like to do as well is I like to tell people, look, start with the concept. What are you trying to achieve? What do you want that concept to do? And then once you have that, then you build up your test methodology around it and you say, okay, then how do we evaluate that? How do we make sure the product actually provides the functionality that you're claiming? And that should be developed during your innovation phase, right? Once you get out of the innovation phase and you're ready to develop or put that product more into the regular process, I would say you should already have a good idea of how am I going to evaluate that property, what kind of claim am I going to make, right? And then what kind of standards do I want to put in place there? So make sure, I highly, highly recommend, if you have teams that are separate between your innovation team and your development team and your commercialization team, however you call them, right? Make sure there are bridges and that your quality team at least is involved during the innovation process, even just to say, hey, that innovation, we're not seeing anything that's a red flag. It's fine. Keep going. We'll catch up in 6 months and then we'll see where we are. But there's also instances, and then I've seen that over and over again, where we get a project, the innovation is ready, and then they come to us and we're like, sorry, we won't be able to put it to market because this needs a formal registration with the specific authority, or there is a standard existing, and that can kill an entire innovation. I remember working on protective equipment on visibility garments, right? Garments with high reflective and broad reflective components onto them, etc. The innovation for, they did an amazing work trying to look at the speed of runners at night and things like that. And the problem is there is a very specific standard for Europe that you have to follow, where there has to be a specific coverage of reflective material on your garment before you can actually go to market, right? And that is highly regulated. If you don't catch that at the beginning, you're going to spend resources to develop something that you're not going to be able to talk about at all, right?
Exactly.
And so that's one piece where, and you can't expect your innovation team to be fully versed in all regulatory concerns, right? It has to be that expertise stays usually with the quality or your compliance team, but bring those people in the innovation process. Touch base once in a while.
So bring them into the conversation as early as possible.
Yeah.
Great. Another question from the audience here, Norbert. Have you come across a situation where, regulators know less than a topic than, your own team, and like, how do you kind of handle those type of situations?
It happens. I think you've got to keep thinking that regulators are not necessarily the know-it-all, and what they usually lack is an in-depth understanding of what the industry is about. So, for example, when we started working on hazardous chemical for Adidas, we started back in '98. I think this was the first we had a major claim, product was recalled, stopped in Amsterdam, cadmium, what is going on? And so that's how we started the work there. But we realized as well is that there is not necessarily the knowledge of what it means for the industry, because you couldn't replace things, the chemicals, because they had a function in the product, right? And so there's this constant conversation when you look at hazardous chemicals and lobbying, and companies in the sportswear world are representing, are kind of working together to make sure they represent their interest. But they also explain that if we remove that entire chemical, then there's no alternative that's available at this point, right? So it has to be, think of it as a collaboration, as a conversation, and as an education process. The regulator comes to the conversation with their own agenda, which is all valid, and we want them to, but you as an industry representative have your own concerns as well. So sharing those and making sure it's based on data, based on information that's valid as well, not just cost, because it's not a good argument, unfortunately. It doesn't always work. But that it's like, yeah, sometimes you have to phase it out because the alternative is not available yet.
Okay. Well, thanks for answering that question from the audience, Norbert. I think that's a wonderful answer. So, we'll be transitioning now to the end of the conversation, but I did want to ask you, Norbert, if people wanted to get in touch with you afterwards, continue the conversation, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to continue that specific conversation on LinkedIn. You can just reach out to me on there. And I'm also looking for professionals, operations professional, quality professionals who love to geek on topics, because I'm trying to create a coloring book for quality professional, operations professionals, and their kids, listing out some of the like high-level concepts around quality and compliance, but kind of making it a fun twist to it. So yeah, reach out to me. I'm looking for people who want to have those conversations as well. I'm always happy to have a talk, a quick Zoom call to catch up and see what the problems are, if I may help or not. But sometimes it's good to have someone to just chat with and flush ideas through. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Norbert. I really appreciate it and the insights you shared about this today. Daniel, Corey, I'll pass it back to you guys for wrap up.
Yeah, sure. Just thank you everyone for joining today. Norbert, again, thank you so much for your time and insights. I'd like to help on the illustration front of the coloring book. And with that, I'll pass it to Corey to wrap up for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Daniel. Listed below are, you can see on the page, just a few strategies that Prescouter leverages to assist clients around product development and R&D and those activities. So yeah, if you're interested in learning how we could potentially help with your initiatives, definitely don't hesitate to reach out at my email below at ccats@prescouter.com. Otherwise, keep an eye out. We're hosting many webinars coming up in 2024. So looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Thanks, Corey. And as you mentioned, we're doing, this is a kind of a monthly series. Next month, we're going to be looking at autonomous systems and how companies can implement them in their operations. We have two, again, world-class experts who will be joining us. who you see on the screen. One is a professor and another is from so please take a moment to complete the survey at the end of this webinar when it's closed up, and let us know what you think, and hopefully we'll see you next month for this this webinar. Yeah. Thanks everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks. Thank you.